This is Bill with BP Automotive. So all the buzz today we see when you're searching LS swap harness on Facebook and Instagram and Google, maybe even YouTube, is all these people ranting and raving about the China harnesses. So, buy a China harness. It's $350. Save yourself the money. Mine worked great. It's fired up the first time. So, we've had one of those China harnesses here for quite some time that was brought to us by somebody who was very concerned about what they saw when they purchased it. We were a little out of their price range, they felt, so, and they're fairly local. And so they got a hold of one of these harnesses and, they stopped in and said, can you look at this? I think there's some things that aren't right about it. And, as soon as we pulled it out of the box, there were some things that were wrong that we could see right off the bat. And even one of them is a severe safety concern. So take a look at the video and see what you think, and I'll let you decide for yourself. We decided to dissect it and dig into this harness so that you guys can get an in-depth look of what's inside and what goes beyond initial impressions from somebody who's an end user. This is coming from very specific things that we look for as professionals to make sure that you're getting a quality harness when it's built by us, because we're very specific in what we do, down to the 10th or 100th of a millimeter for crimp height and width. So with this, we don't ever generally try to compare ourselves to a competitor. I get calls all the time, guys like, well, what's better about yours than the China harness, or what's better about your harness than so-and-so's, or what's better about yours than this guy's. And we don't get into that whole rat race. I generally just try to tell people, hey, this is how we do it, this is why we do it that way, and it's because this is the standard, and we want to meet the standard, the true standard of what it takes to build a harness to GM standards. And so we generally don't do some things like this video. But we done it for two reasons. Number one, it's coming from China, so we don't have a real competitor for this. This is a knockoff counterfeit harness with counterfeit connectors on it. And number two, it has some real safety concerns and property damage concerns. So these are something that we wanted to make you aware of so that you could make an informed decision and decide if it's worth the risk to you or not. Take a look at the video. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you hit the bell, subscribe to us, and keep an eye out for newer videos. We're going to be releasing some videos about some of the inside things that we do here, and maybe just getting some interview time in or some vlogging type time in so that you guys can get to know us better and see what kind of product it is that we build here and try to give you the best price possible for the best quality product you can get. Thank you. So we're going to dig in to this China-made harness here, and the first thing we're going to do is look at the instructions. So we've got the instructions here, very clearly a photocopy. This was added in after. Fairly sure that these are a photocopy of one of our stateside competitors' instructions. So what you have here is, well, not only is it a photocopy, it's a terrible photocopy. You can't hardly see it. It's much smaller. So in a dimly lit garage, or most garage environments, you're not going to have the best lighting, so it's going to be kind of hard to read these. They're all not even full size, and especially this that has the roadmap, because this harness is not labeled at all. So you're going to be extremely dependent upon this roadmap. And so it's very blotchy, and you're going to have a hard time making out what any of it is. So then you got another set of pages, or a page that's been photocopied, and it's very small and hard to read. And then here you have, a spreadsheet that tells you what the sensor or what the connection is, and then what color wires are going to it. First thing I note is none of these are GM color codes, so none of them match any kind of schematic that you're going to find. And so I'm guessing that if you try to get a hold of the manufacturer of this, you'd probably have a hard time getting hold of schematics. That's kind of why we follow GM color codes. So if you need a schematic, you just pull a schematic for a GM application, and the color codes are going to be there for you. So Next page, yet another small photocopied page. Same here with this one. The diagrams here, they must have been bigger in the original set of instructions, so they're at least easy to make out. These are very hard to read, and this is not the fuse block that comes on this harness. This is the fuse block that style that comes on our competitor's harness that's here stateside. You know, another small photocopied page, and here we are with the actual fuse block layout that they just punched in there and went with that. So you got to keep that with it. And then here's the T56 to 4L60E add-in harness. Whoever purchased this harness from China and then resold it here, added this in for the fellow that ordered this harness locally and then got it, was concerned, and brought it to us. So the first things that we had noticed when the customer brought this to us, we pointed out very quickly. In the previous video that we've already shot, we did open up the harness a little bit, and I'm going to open it up even more in this review so that you can see that we didn't modify this. We're just going to open it up a little farther back so you can see the same thing that we saw when we opened it. First thing is, here's the PCM connector. There is no bolt in the PCM connector. So these bolt into the PCM. So you're going to have a bolt. Well, these GM connectors, or Delphi connector, I should say, sorry, takes a special bolt. It's got a certain diameter collar on it. And then you get your threaded section down here. And this is for a lock ring that holds it in. So this seals against that seal just like it's supposed to, so that you don't get any moisture inside this connector. Because DC voltage, when it becomes in contact with water, it corrodes, almost instantly starts corroding. So you're going to have a water leakage around there, because if you go and get a bolt, more than likely a bolt this length is going to have threads all the way up, and you have to hope that it's going to have the correct diameter shaft on it too. So because water will leak around the threads and then down into the connector. And then even more concerning than that is there are actual open cavities on this connector here that were just left open. So you can easily get moisture down in the connector. And if you do that, what will happen is the terminals will corrode to the PCM terminals. You will not be able to remove these connectors unless you pull on them so hard that it pulls the terminal out of the PCM. And either way, you're going to be either repairing the connections in this harness and then also replacing your PCM and then getting that PCM flashed for standalone again. So the money saved really just isn't worth it right off the initial impressions. You're going to have trouble down the road if you mount this in the engine bay. Some of you guys won't be mounting it in the engine bay, but you know, you can still get moisture in a PCM connector from many different avenues. You can have condensation inside the vehicle that happens to drip in there. There's all kinds of different things, and it is just not worth it. Secondly, so this was added in by the guy that sent the harness to this customer. You've got a wire here that is completely strained. You would have to cut this and extend it to make sure that you didn't have any trouble with that. So that will probably eventually break. Then you'll have trouble with your transmission shifting or maybe potentially damaging your transmission. Again, makes it not worth it. We are already just at the PCM connectors, and we've already found a couple deficiencies that could result in more damage than what you saved by purchasing the harness. Secondly, our fuse block has been used in GM applications, and it has a cover over the top and a cover over the bottom. So both of these act as splash guards and as moisture guards, so you can't get directly to the terminals. So these you can see directly at the terminals, or see the terminals directly, sorry. And so it'd be very easy to build up moisture in there if this was mounted in the engine bay. Anything mounted in the engine bay is always preferred to be completely sealed. So let's say you decide you're going to mount this inside anyway. This grommet is taped, so you can't move it. But if you go to seal your firewall, well, whoever added this in took the liberty of just cutting open the grommet and sliding this wiring through. And so this harness, if you mounted it and left this like this, more than likely you would end up with moisture or water from the outside of the vehicle draining in onto the PCM connectors and then eventually potentially damaging your harness and your PCM connectors. So, and this is just the beginning. So we got up to the trunk line here, and one of the first things that we noticed is, well, this O2 sensor here is fairly short, so you don't really have the option of running long tube headers unless you happen to find an O2 sensor with a long connection on it. You're going to have to get an extension of some sort potentially. This is a China-made connector. It does say PED on it, which stands for Packard Electrical Division. That is how Delphi identified its products with an abbreviation where it couldn't put Delphi on there that would be legible. So this is for sure a China-made connector. It has a completely different tint, completely different feel. It's just completely different than a Delphi connector. And this is also a made in China TPA here, and they're very loose. So you can wiggle this, and you shouldn't be able to wiggle your TPA. All of this should be firm and tight because that's how you know that it is actually retaining the terminal where it should be. So the manufacturing standards on this is very laxed. So this is actually what you would consider not just a knockoff connector, it's a counterfeit connector because they actually put Delphi's name on it and it's not a Delphi connector. Lastly, we've got your two battery wires. This is what goes to your fuse block and provides the constant battery power to your fuse block. This is to be connected to the starter, your battery stud. So what we have here is straight wire from here to your fuse block. So that is a very harsh environment around heat, around many other things. You're also going to be penetrating the firewall potentially. These have no fusible link in them. So if this wire at anywhere in the trunk line or even at the fuse block or even right here, if it shorts against a header, these wires are going to completely burn in two, and the resulting effect could be that it burns through several wires in the harness and then causes damage to your PCM or your harness. And worst case scenario is, this could burn your car to the ground. And at that point, you don't know who to hold liable because this came from China. This is why they can sell these things for so cheap, because they just throw them together and they'll sell you a product that's unsafe because there's no repercussions for them if it damages anything that you own or causes personal injury. So right here is where we broke into the harness because we were curious as to see what kind of splicing techniques and some other things that they used. And this has got every last ground wire here. There's no splice. They just shoved them all in this terminal, taped them together, and crimped them all under one terminal. The terminal's very flimsy, very easy to bend. You can just tell that is not going to last. And we get to where the splicing's at, because every fuel injection harness is going to have a splice. There's no way around that unless you had a single fuse for every single sensor, and you would have an enormous fuse block at that point. And so we use a technique called ultrasonic welding. We have an in-house ultrasonic welder, clamps the wires together and vibrates ultrasonically until the copper wires are welded together into one complete copper, what they call a nugget. So this, you cannot pull this apart. So at least you will break the wires before you pull this apart. They crimped this. Some manufacturers still crimp, but the majority of your actual manufacturing facilities will use ultrasonic welding. Okay. Now, what was worse, the worst part about this is that this splice was not heat shrunk. It was taped. It just had tape over it. Just one layer of El Cheapo harness tape. So when we do a splice here, we use the actual Delphi heat shrink that has the white glue and is dual walled and very thick and very rigid as well. So this is completely watertight. You're not going to get any water in this. If you tape a splice, well, you're going to have problems down the road. No questions asked. That's if your car doesn't accidentally get burnt down at first, or you don't have problems with the PCM connectors and your connectors being corroded to your PCM. So if all that stuff doesn't happen, you know, this will eventually give you trouble here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up some more of this harness and get to the next bank, because there's going to be another splice up in here. I have no idea where, in here somewhere. And we'll speed it up so you don't have to sit there for a long time. This is the Down and Dirty review, and then once we get there, you'll be able to see that I'm going to guess that we're going to find another tape splice there, and we will go from there. One thing to note is this was not even adhesive heat shrink on here at all, so none of the places on the harness use adhesive line heat shrink. It's just standard heat shrink. One thing to note is here is a battery circuit that goes into our fuse block and then runs through the harness and goes down. Here is... we use a SAE approved piece of heat shrink here. This is not Delphi, it saves on space. And then also if we use that heat shrink here, if this ever had to be repaired, you would have a really hard time getting that heat shrink off. So that's why we use this here. We're kind of thinking of you guys. If you ever have to service anything or anything has to be fixed, it's really easy to fix. So this is a fusible link right here that's in our run here. So if anything ever happens all the way back to the fuse block, it'll burn this and won't burn your car to the ground. So now let's dig in here and we'll see what we find. So here we are at bank number 2. We have a single wire coming in here and 5 wires coming out, just like we did bank number 1. So this is definitely the ignition splice for your coils and your injectors for bank number 2. So what we have here is that puppy is taped. There is no heat shrink on there at all. So we're going to open this up, if I can find the end. Right there it is. And I'll show you it's crimped just like the other one. And here we are. May end up having to cut it. They've got this all wadded up on here pretty bad. I could probably almost pull this tape clean off of the splice and expose some of it. We're going to cut it open here. And right there we are. You can see right there where it was taped just like the other one was. They taped all the wires together to make it easier to crimp it. And then they're all crimped together. So when you go to buy one of these harnesses, they don't even use adhesive line heat shrink. So that goes to show you why it is so much cheaper than anything else you can find. And on top of that, this loom is very, 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 very cheap. I mean, this is not even half the thickness of factory style loom. I can easily take this loom and snap it apart. I mean, you can clearly see how I mean, this is terrible loom. Terrible loom. This is probably something you'd find at Advanced Auto Parts or AutoZone or something. That shouldn't even be in an engine harness. So there you have it. That's kind of the quick and dirty. One other thing to note is here's the 4L60E connector that they added in. It's a China connector and a China TPA. They've got wires in a bind here as well, and the speed sensor is shorter than the connector, so you'd have to loop this way past the connector, so just so your speed sensor will reach. And then some things that we had happen, I noticed this wire came depinned even with your TPA in there, and I put it all back together after the last video and wanted to see if it would even stay, and it's still popping out because this will not even come close to reaching the length as the other terminals. And so this right here would be a nightmare for the end user to troubleshoot. So there you have it. Should you buy one or should you not? I mean, I know I build harnesses and we sell them and all that good stuff, but I'd steer clear for safety's sake. Make sure you hit the bell, subscribe to us, and keep an eye out for newer videos. We're going to be releasing some videos about some of the inside things that we do here, and maybe just getting some interview time in or some vlogging type time in so that you guys can get to know us better and see what kind of product it is that we build here and try to give you the best price possible for the best quality product you can get. Thank you.